Hello friend. So we built this log cabin stroke workshop shed for my dad. It was quite a big project, quite an unusual one. Let's see how we did it. So this is going to be the site of the new workshop shed. We've got it roughly marked up. And what you're looking at here is my first attempt to skim off the turf with this ancient backhoe. It might not look it in the video, but this is actually quite a slopey site. So the foundation and groundworks for this workshop are actually quite a substantial project in their own right. What we're aiming for here is to remove the topsoil, keeping it separate from the shale underneath, while making a nice level site. It sounds ridiculously easy to say, but it's actually quite tricky to achieve in practice. We hired a big vibrating roller to compact the sub-base stone that we got. This stuff is made up of angular stones from about 40mm down to dust, and it's graded so that they tightly interlock and form a really strong layer once they're compacted. The backhoe was super useful for spreading the stone out, but there was still plenty of hand wheelbarrowing and fine-tuning of the level to be done. Between my dad, myself, and the plans, such as they are for this shed, there was a legendary amount of umming and ahhing about the design for this slab. The foundations round the outside perimeter vary in depth from about half a foot to almost 4 foot. Basically, we dug down to very hard stone all the way around. It's not on film, but the sand blinding layer was compacted with a plate vibrator and had to be very level. It stops the sub-base puncturing the damp-proof membrane, but it also provides a dead flat surface for the insulation to sit on. We're going for a monolithic style slab, which just means the steel reinforced concrete is all poured in one go, including the perimeter foundations. The design of a base like this will depend loads on site specifics and the kind of building you're making. My dad and I agreed and disagreed and re-agreed and disagreed again many times on the design of this. If it's possible for a complete amateur to offer any advice on an undertaking like this, it's to try and use diagrams when you're talking through the design. It can really help minimize cross-purpose talk. We had some good exciting downpours at this point, turning the thing into a swimming pool, and the wind kept wanting to get the DPM and insulation boards airborne. It even got the tripod over. A good amount of hand pumping, toweling, and good old dogged persistence later, and soon enough it was the big concreting day. Let's do this. It was a super early start. We were up late last night putting all the standoffs onto the wire mesh. Don't underestimate how long that takes, by the way. So all hands on deck to arrange some of the rebar around the perimeter and wire tie the mesh together. You can see in the top right the digger taking off there, and this is an exercise in the unexpected. We had been doing a lot of work to the access track to this site, and the concrete ready mix driver had even come the previous day and given it the all okay, lulling us into a false sense of security. Come the morning though, when he arrived, for some inexplicable reason he just would not even turn onto the track from the road, despite whatever arguments we attempted to make. The backhoe was pressed into emergency service, carting the concrete from the road. Now, if you haven't seen the video about the digger, you should check it out. It's a fun watch. Essentially, it's a very old machine and it couldn't be relied on too much. And luckily, our neighbour Lynn came and helped out, and you can see his machine there. It could hold way more concrete in the front bucket. So yeah, it started to look like this thing might be possible with Lynn here, and it meant I could help out with the wheelbarrowing, spreading, and all the rest of it. This concrete is quite high specification concrete, but it did need consolidating. Dad was on vibrator duty. It's a super important job to achieve the full strength of the concrete, and it involves a little bit less back braking too. It is possible to over vibrate the concrete, and then the aggregate starts separating out from the water. So some is great and it helps it flow into the deep parts of the foundation round the rebar, but more is not necessarily better. The rule of thumb is to keep vibrating until no more bubbles appear on the surface. That was the last of that particular ready mix load, which gives us a moment of reprieve to work out what on earth just happened. We had rented one of these power screeders and it worked really well. Despite none of us having used one before, it leaves a decent flat surface and does an additional bit of consolidation. The real skill here is not in using the machine itself, but in using the rakes and other tools to get an appropriate level before screeding. To allow for a seamless joint with the next batch of concrete, it would be nice to keep one tapered wet edge. You can see Sam vibrating at the back there. That's because some inevitably got spilled from the barrows during the transfer. It's not captured on film, but when the next batch of concrete arrived, there were some more backhoe capers. As I was doing a back and forth run, hoping to God Lynn would arrive soon, I was opening the back up and over window and it just came away in my hand. You can imagine it, a big chunk of rusty metal framed glass that you need to manoeuvre out of the cab without breaking it. All good fun when you're trying to deliver concrete under time pressure. No doubt any professionals watching this are sighing at all the schoolboy errors on display. Please do feel welcome to vent in the comments. Nevertheless, thanks to this awesome crew, Luke, Hal, Sam, my dad, Lynn who came to save our bacon, we have a mostly level, solid, insulated base to put a shed on. After floating and a bit of curing, we used laser lines to guide the grinding of the crack control joints. The idea is to grind partway through, and then if it does crack anywhere, it'll be along that seam, hidden away and just where you wanted it. The shuttering ply's been removed from the sides, and now we're just filling that gap with drainage stone. You can see how dusty it is here, and that's with us using a hose on the big pile of stones to try and keep the dust down. This is early in the morning and Sam and me are just trying to level out the remains of the huge pile of drainage stone that was delivered so that this can arrive. The three-wheeled forklift is pretty nifty in that its wheels can turn 90 degrees, allowing it to sort of crab along sideways. But the single back wheel did manage to find the groove between the newly laid surplus pad and the probably too thick uncompacted stone, and it got stuck there. Bizarrely enough, the driver seemed to really enjoy being pulled out by the ancient backhoe, and he left with a grin on his face. So this log cabin comes as a kit of parts that theoretically fit together kind of like Lego. The first step is simply to unpack, lay out the pieces in order and get a handle of what's what from the instructions. It's not an insignificant step with a building this big. The wall boards are 1 3/4 inches thick or 44mm and have a double tongue and groove to fit to the boards above and below them. All the wood in this build is Scandinavian spruce, and when I was trying to find out where exactly it came from, the most specific I could get was Norway or Sweden. It's advertised as slow grown, and in fairness, we didn't have a single one of these boards split horribly in the way you'd expect standard cheap pine to. Then again, we were being very careful to pre-puncture the wood, as they say in the instructions. About 1/2 to 1/3 of the horizontal wall boards were slightly warped, and in that instance you're supposed to use long screws vertically to pull it tight and straight against the board below so the tongue and grooves are nice and snug. These screws were included in the kit, but not enough of them to do the quantity of slightly warped boards. This stage can go really quite quickly. There is a known and recognised phenomena in straw bale construction called Bale Frenzy. It's where things go so smoothly and so quickly, with people placing bales in the wall like Lego and really encouraged by the fast progress, and before you know it, the wall's all up and it's slightly out of true and it's really quite hard to correct at that stage. Anyway, I think you can probably see how this might apply here, and I did everything I could to check levels and dimensions and re-refer back to the instructions often. The main structure of the workshop is 9 metres by 6 metres. The opening closest to us will have 2 garage doors, and while the back wall, the gable end, supports the side walls and keeps them nice and square, at this point there's nothing really keeping it in place at the front there, so that's why we've got those diagonal pieces clamped in, and in fact we use the ratchet strap here and there to kind of square it off. The purlins, for practical reasons and expenses, can't run the whole length of the roof. Instead, some are 2/3 the length and some are 1/3. The way the pre-machined cross lap joints in the long purlins fit in the triangular roof trusses is quite satisfying, but the way the short purlins fit is with metal joist hangers, and that just doesn't seem quite right somehow. I'm sure it's strong enough, but it just doesn't seem satisfying. The spruce roof boards are very much like old school floorboards. They fit together with tongue and groove, and we're using the clamps as spreader bars to just push the joints really tightly together and getting rid of any warp in the boards before nailing them down to the purlins. Now you might think, flowering elbow, this is a bit of a weird project for you. It doesn't involve using upcycled materials, designing anything novel, or chainsaw milled timber from wind-felled trees. I mean, you're even following instructions, for goodness sake. Though, admittedly, that did require some mental dexterity. The question remains, why are you doing it? Well, permit me a slightly oblique answer here. Let's talk about Compramise. My dad wanted a workshop. He chose and purchased this kind of workshop. I didn't really do any research into it, but it sounds like it was pretty good economic value. The concrete base certainly isn't what you'd call environmentally friendly, but it's hard to beat for a workshop floor that's going to see heavy use and vehicles. The 4 inches of underfloor insulation might seem a little overkill, but we did the same when we made the flowering elbow workshop, and it proved really worthwhile. It stabilizes the temperature a lot and makes it a nice environment to be in. Having it insulated also opens it up for future uses beyond the life of the log cabin structure. Anyway, where am I going with this? Compromise. Yeah, there's loads of different ways to make a shed, and there's tons of different kinds of shed you'll be left with. My and Sam's focus is often on the way of making, the process and the journey. It's an almost unthinkable stance in the construction industry, not to want to have it done quickly and easily and cheaply, but to actually want to take a long time, to gladly seek out and overpay the cost to nature, to have it be difficult, to have to learn and maybe even invent new techniques and designs. Saying that out loud, I can hear my father's voice inside saying, well, that's bullshit, the customer doesn't want that. But then I guess that was half the point of this whole flowering elbow thing, was to think through what it might be like to be less customer and more maker, less consumer and more creator. So yeah, I was pretty unsure whether to share this construction project on the channel. Obviously I did. It's almost certainly more complicated than this, but the story I tell myself is that my dad just wanted a shed, and I guess I just wanted to make my dad happy. So this is this is the roundabout answer. A foolish child's quest, perhaps, but there it is. Dad and helper Ruth took care of the crucial step of protecting the wood. He considered this in way more detail than I can go into here, both in terms of visual impact and durability, both crucial in such a massive perishable structure. There's still some detailing to be done with this log cabin stroke workshop, including making concrete ramps to drive vehicles in and out, brush seals, insulating inside, that kind of thing. I think this is probably the last you'll see of it in videos here though. It might have given you some ideas. Okay, peace and love. See you next time.